This is section 4.1, and in 4.1 we're talking about congruent figures. So now we're going to take different shapes and decide are they congruent or not. And I'm going to explain exactly how you determine if two shapes are congruent. So our objective here in this section here on this video is going to be to recognize congruent figures and their parts. Okay, so let's talk about congruent figures. Okay. Congruent figures have the same size and same shape. So something you might want to do here is highlight this part. Again, congruent figures have the same size and exact same shape. Okay. When two figures are congruent, you can slide it, flip it, turn it. Okay, so that it fits exactly on the other one. All right, so now as you look at these shapes and as we go through these shapes, you're going to find out that not every shape's going to be in the same orientation as the other one is. So you may have to turn it around, you may have to flip it over, things like that. Okay? All right, so here we're going to determine whether two figures are congruent by comparing their corresponding parts. Now, corresponding parts. This part's not in your notes, but you might want to write this down here. Corresponding parts are parts that are in the same position but on different shapes. We've talked about corresponding angles before. These are very similar. We know how we talked about top left, top right, all that kind of stuff when we had parallel lines. Corresponding parts are kind of the same thing. It's an angle or side that's in the same position, but they're on two different shapes. Okay, so this part you might want to be able to write down in your notes as well. Okay, so let's talk about congruent figures then. All right, congruent figures. It says here, congruent polygons have congruent corresponding parts. In other words, they're matching sides and angles. Okay, so there's two sets here. These are the sides up top. Okay, these are the sides up here. Sides that are in the same position are congruent to each other. And these are the angles that are in the same position that are congruent to each other. Now, the angles, a lot of times, if it's two separate shapes, the angles are the easiest ones to find. Because you can you can use the one letter. Now, if there's shapes that share sides, then that changes the game a little bit. But for the most part, you're going to see two shapes that are separated. Now, when you name congruent polygons, you must list the corresponding vertices in the same order. So now you can't just start naming these however you want to name them. Okay, you have to name them in specific order. So what they did here is they've told you this statement that ABCD is congruent to EFGH. And you'll notice that what I'll do here is I will mark this as we look at this statement, I'm going to mark this as a 1, that's a 2, that's a 3, and that's a 4. Okay, now I'm also going to mark this, that's a 1, that's a 2, that's a 3, and that's a 4. Alright, so I need the blacks and the blues to match up in terms of number-wise. So when we talk about angles here, and we talk about congruent angles, as you can see, angle A, okay, and angle E are in the same position. They are congruent to each other. Angle B and angle F, they're both in the second spot. They are congruent to each other. Angle D and angle H are congruent to each other. Those are both the 4s. And then finally, the C and G are congruent to each other. Okay, so the angles are kind of easy to figure out, and that's what they've marked out over here in this spot. You can see the angles here as they've marked that out. Okay, now the sides. So if I am going here with sides, and I'm looking at different sides here, what I'm going to do is, and to be honest with you, I'm going to teach this so that you don't look at the name, or you don't look at the picture. Because the picture, it's really hard to tell sometimes on the picture. What I'm going to do is I'm going to match up, if you notice here, that I'm going to match up the sides with the numbers that they are. So if you look here, you see AB and AB is numbers 1 and 2. Okay, well, in order for me to name the side that goes with that, I have to name the 1 and 2 from the other shape, which in this case happens to be E and F. So that's 1 and 2, and this is 1 and 2. They're both in the same position. That's 1, that's 2, that's 1, that's 2. That's why I know you notice I numbered these 1, 2, 3, 4 in each one. BC is 2 and 3. Okay, BC is 2 and 3, so therefore the 2 and 3 on the other one has to be the same as BC, which is FG. C and D is 3 and 4 here. CD is 3, 4. Therefore, I have to go 3, 4, which is G and H. Then the last one goes 4 and 1. So again, I have to go 4 and 1 on the other one, which means it's H and E. It's just simply a matter of matching up the correct sides and angles. Okay, so these two shapes are congruent because their sides and angles that are corresponding are exactly the same. Okay, now let's take a look here at an example here of finding corresponding congruent parts. Okay, it says here, finding congruent parts. If HIJK is congruent to LMNO, what are the congruent corresponding parts? Okay, so now, as I look at this, I'm not going to look at the picture. I'm looking at the name. So I'm going to zoom in here, and on my name, again, I'm going to label this. That's 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then I'm also going to come over here, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so now I want to match up my sides. As a matter of fact, let's start angles. These are two separate angles. Angles are always the easiest. So I'm going to match up. Let's go angle H. Angle H is going to be congruent to, and then angle H, you notice, is in position 1. So I need the other angle that's in position 1, which is angle L. Then I'm going to use the angle that's in position 2. Angle I is going to be congruent to angle M. Angle J is going to be congruent to angle N. And angle K is going to be congruent to angle O. Okay, so again, you can see that the angles are always the easiest ones. All right, sides. Okay, sides. Now, something that might help you as well is if you mark these on the picture. All right, so we said angle OH is the same as angle L. Those both have one marking. Then angle I is going to have 2 markings, and angle M, that's 2. And then angle J and N, that's going to be my 3. And then K and O would be my 4. Okay, so I've got the angles marked, so you can see how you mark the angles there as well. Now, the sides. Let's start with H and I. H and I is 1 and 2. Side HI is going to be congruent to 1 and 2 from the other names, which happens to be L and M. So, HI is going to get 1 mark. LM is going to get 1 mark. Then let's go 2 and 3. IJ is going to be congruent to side MN. So that's going to get 2. IJ is going to get 2 marks, and MN is going to get 2 marks. Then let's go with JK. 3 and 4 is going to be congruent to the 3 and 4 on the other one, which is NO. Okay, so JK is going to get 3 marks, and NO is going to get 3 marks. And then finally, I go 4 and 1, which is K and H, and then is congruent to O and L. And again, this is going to get 1, 2, 3, 4 marks, 4 marks. And now you have your figure in congruent. Okay, because all the sides and all the angles corresponding are congruent to each other. Okay, now, one last thing here to talk about, and that is the third angles theorem. The third angles theorem says that if 2 angles of one triangle are congruent to 2 angles of another triangle, then the third angles are congruent to each other. So in this case, if I know A is congruent to D, and I know that B is congruent to E, then I know that these last two angles have to be the same measure. Okay, so kind of an easy way to remember this. Let's say I said A is 40 and D is 40, and let's say B is 60 and E would then be 60. Well, you'll notice to find out that both of these angles have to be 80 degrees using triangle angle sum theorem. Okay, so it just kind of goes to show you if two of the angles are congruent in each triangle, and the third ones are congruent as well. Okay, so let's take a look here at this last example. It says here, are the triangles congruent? And then you have to justify your answer. So in order to justify your answer, you have to show that all the sides and all the angles are congruent. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and let's start with the angles. And if you look in the picture, you can see angles that are marked the same. So let's start off with angle A is congruent to angle E. Okay, angle A and angle E. Wait, how do I know that? Because they both have one single arc marking. Then let's go angle B is congruent to angle D because they have two markings. Well, funny thing, these two angles are also congruent to each other because they are vertical. So I'm going to make 3 marks there. Okay, now I can't say angle C and angle C, unfortunately, because this is something where they share. So what we're going to do is we're going to go angle, and it does matter how you name this. Angle BCA is going to be congruent. Now, if you notice how I named this, I went from B to C to A. So I went from 2 angles to 1 to 3 to 1. 2 to 3 to 1. I have to do the same thing over here. 2 to 3 to 1. So this is going to be DCE. Okay, so I've got my 3 angles now. Now, let's take a look at the sides. So let's start with AB. AB is congruent to, in this case, AB, I go from 1 to 2. So over here it's got the same mark, so I have to go from 1 to 2. So it's ED. AB is congruent to ED. I know that AC, that's the side that has 6 units, is going to be congruent to, and if you look how I followed this, I went A to C, so I went 1 to 3. I've got okay, so since I went 1 to 3, I have to name from AC, and then this is going to be EC. Okay, and then finally, as you look at the other side, the third side here, I've got AB, I've got AC. The last one I'm going to look at is the side with 4, which I'm going to say BC is congruent to, and in this case, BC, as you look here, BC goes from 2 to 3. So this guy is 4 lengths, so I need to go from 2 to 3. So that one's going to be DC. Okay, now I also know now that all these two triangles are congruent because all their corresponding parts and are congruent to each other, their sides and angles. So as I look at this, I'm going to name this first triangle on the left, triangle ABC, is going to be congruent to, and I have to match this. So I went from 1 to 2 to 3 on the angle markings. So I need to do the same thing over here, 1 to 2 to 3. So ABC is congruent to triangle EDC. Okay, so I know this video is a little long, all right? Bear with me. Now you should be able to complete the examples here on Class Kick, so you should be good now.